So March the 15th, 1912. The divine will is the sanctity of sanctities. The souls who live in the divine will are true living hosts. This is wonderful teaching now. So Luisa says, she continues in her usual state. So Jesus said, my daughter, my will is the sanctity of sanctities, because the divine will is the essence of God. It has to be the sanctity of sanctities. The soul who does my will, that means lives in my will, however small, ignorant and unknown, leaves the other saints behind in spite of their prodigies, sensational conversions and miracles. Now many people find that difficult to understand. But if I'm a small person in a satellite going to the moon, I am travelling in a much more exalted way than anybody who's travelling to England in any form of transport you can get. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because I'm in a superior flight. It's as simple as that. And I'm going to a superior goal. That's what he's saying. So no matter how small and apparently unimportant you are to yourself or to anybody else, the living in the divine will is the sanctity of sanctities, and therefore does in fact surpass all the prodigies, sensational conversions and miracles of the past. Isn't that incredible? Rather, in comparison, the souls who do my will are queens. That's the Song of Songs, chapter 6, verse 8. And it is as if all others were at their service. Look at the difference in the status of the two. It seems that the souls who do my will do nothing because it's a completely interior mission, while they actually do everything, because being in my will, they act in a divine manner, in a hidden and surprising way. So, they are the light that illuminates, they are the winds that purify, they are the fire that burns, they are miracles that make others do miracles. Notice they are miracles, because to live like this is miraculous. Those who do miracles are channels, but in these souls, that's those who live in the divine will, resides the power behind those miracles. Isn't that something else? Therefore, people who live in the divine will are the foot of the missionary, the tongue of the preachers, the strength of the weak, the patience of the sick, the rule of the superiors, the obedience of the subjects, the tolerance of the slandered, the firmness in dangers, the heroism of the heroes, the courage of the martyrs, the sanctity of the saints, and so with all the rest. I'd love to know what all the rest are, wouldn't you? Being in my will, they concur with all the good that can exist, both in heaven and on earth. That is the operative statement there. And the rest of it is simply illustrating it. Is that okay? Because being in the divine will, you concur with whatever God is doing, no matter what he's doing or where he's doing it. This is why I can surely say that these souls are my true hosts, but living hosts, not dead ones. Now, what is it about the little wafer that you and I receive as communion? It carries the actual presence of God. And if it didn't carry the actual presence of God, we wouldn't call it Holy Communion. We wouldn't call it a sacred host, would we? No. So what Jesus is saying here is that people who live in the divine will are his true hosts. That means he is actually living within us. That's what you have to take on board. He is actually living within us, and therefore he can work through us. He can look at someone through your eyes. He can speak to someone through your lips. He can approach somebody through your feet. He can help somebody through your hands, and so on and so forth. He can love someone through your heart. They are my true hosts, but living ones, not dead ones. In fact, The accidents that form the host are not full of life. That means the bread, okay, or the wine. They're not full of life, nor do they influence my life, but the soul is full of life. And by doing my will, that's living in the divine will, she influences and concurs with all that I do. So this is something you've got to read over and over again and ask the Lord to enable you to absorb it. This is why these hosts consecrated to my will. Now, there is a prayer of consecration to the divine will. But you can say a prayer of consecration and not be consecrated to the divine will. Have I confused you?
No.
Okay. Because consecration means I actually hand myself over completely. And I can say the words of a most beautiful prayer, and I may not have interiorly handed myself over. I may not have this wonderful prayer in my possession. I may not even know it's written, but I may hand myself over to the Lord, and I'm consecrated to him. That's like saying a husband and wife actually become one by handing themselves over to each other. It's not just something you write on paper. It's not just something you celebrate in a church. You actually do the action of giving to the other. I'm making sense, aren't I?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what he's talking about. That's what consecration is, that we actually give ourselves to him. And whether you do that with the wonderful words that Luisa has given to us, or whether you do them with your own awkward, stuttering words, doesn't actually make any difference.
Yes.
What matters is that you do it. Is that okay? And mean it. Yeah, that you actually do it and you mean it. So, the soul is full of life, and in doing or living in my will, she influences and concurs with all that I do. This is why these hosts consecrated by my will are more dear to me than the very sacramental hosts. Why? Because the sacramental hosts can't give him any response. And if I have reason to exist in the sacramental hosts, it is to form the sacramental hosts of my will. So in other words, one consecration is a step to the other. Okay? My daughter, he said, I take such delight in my will that in simply hearing one speak about it, I feel overjoyed. So he's overjoyed at this class.
Yes.
Because we're actually speaking about it. And I call the whole of heaven to make feast. You didn't think that heaven was celebrating every time you came here, did you?
No.
Imagine, he said, yourself, what will become of these souls who will actually do it, that's who will actually live in it, as distinct from reading about it. In them I find all the contentment, and to them I give all the contentment. Their life is the life of the blessed in heaven. You're already living the life that the blessed in heaven are living. The only difference is that on earth you also have suffering and purification, whereas in heaven their suffering and purification is finished. Two things only do they cherish, desire and yearn, my will and love. Now, would you ever take your pen and put a ring around those words? Because I've told you many times that divine will and love is the summary of the 36 volumes. Divine will and love. So even if you never had an opportunity to read the whole of the 36 volumes, once you try as best you can to live in the divine will and to love with Jesus' love, you are actually fulfilling what is being said in these volumes. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, all they want is my will and love. They have little to do, while in fact they do everything. The virtues themselves remain absorbed in my will and in love, and so they have nothing to do with them anymore, since my will contains, possesses and absorbs everything, but in a way which is divine, immense and endless, This is the life of the blessed. Tony Hickey calls that infinite, perfect and eternal. That's his great expression, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So even the virtues that you have been living, they're all taken up into the divine will and into love, and therefore they're all transformed and they operate at a much higher plane. Now that needs a good bit of thought put into it.